I am Dr. Nandita Kaushal, Senior Assistant Professor in the Department of Public Administration, University of Lucknow, Lucknow, Uttar Pradesh. I am going to present the module Public Administration and Public Policy. Objectives of this module: after studying this unit, you should be able to explain the meaning of public policy, discuss the relationship between politics and policy, highlight the stages in policy process, and discuss the importance of public policy. Introduction. Public policies are as old as governments. Whatever be the form, whether it is oligarchy, monarchy, aristocracy, tyranny, democracy, etc., whenever and wherever governments have existed, public policies have been formulated and implemented. To cope with the varied problems and demands of the people, the government has to make many policies. These policies are called public policies. This unit tries to explain the meaning and types of public policy. It will highlight the different components of a policy and distinguish between policy, decision and goal. An attempt will be made to bring out the relationship between politics and policy, and importance and characteristics of public policy will also be discussed. Next, coming to the relationship between politics and public policy. Before discussing the meaning of public policy, it would be better if we are clear about the relationship between public policy and politics. Policy making process is a part of politics and political action. According to Gabriel Almond, political system is a set of interactions having structures, each of which performs its functions in order to keep it like an ongoing concern. It is a set of processes that routinely converts inputs into outputs. Almond classifies inputs of political system into generic functional categories like political socialization and recruitment, interest aggregation, interest articulation, and political communication. Output activities are those which are carried on by a political system in response to demands or stresses placed upon the system in the form of inputs. Outputs can take the form of governmental policies, programs, decisions, etc. Another model on politics policy relationship is the feedback or the black box model coined by David Easton. According to this model, the remaining demands which have not been included in the decisions and policies will again be fed back through the same process for the purpose of its conversion into decisions. These two models establish clearly the relationship between politics and policies in our politics system. Next, coming to the meaning of public policy. There are various studies about public policy and many scholars have attempted to define public policy from different angles. Before explaining the meaning of public policy, let us first go through some of its definitions. Robert I. Stone terms public policy as the relationship of government unit to its environment. Thomas R. Dye says that public policy is whatever government chooses to do or not to do. Richard Rose says that public policy is not a decision. It is a course or pattern of activity. In Carl J. Friedrich's opinion, public policy is a proposed course of action of a person, group or government within a given environment, providing opportunities and obstacles which the policy was proposed to utilize and overcome in an effort to reach a goal or realize an objective or purpose. From these definitions, it is clear that public policies are governmental decisions and are actually the result of activities which the government undertakes in pursuance of certain goals and objectives. It can also be said that public policy formulation and implementation involves a well-planned pattern or course of activity. It requires a thoroughly close-knit relation and interaction between the important governmental agencies, viz. The political executive, legislature, bureaucracy and judiciary. The following points will make the nature of public policy more clearly in your minds. First, public policies are goal-oriented. Public policies are formulated and implemented in order to attain the objectives which the government has in view for the ultimate benefit of the masses in general. These policies clearly spell out the programs of government. Second, public policy is the outcome of the government's collective actions. It means that it is a pattern or course of activity of the governmental officials and actors in a collective sense than being termed as their discrete and segregated decisions. Third, public policy is what the government actually decides or chooses to do. It is the relationship of the government units to the specific field of political environment in a given administrative system. It can take a variety of forms like law, ordinances, court decisions, executive orders, decisions, etc. Fourth, public policy is positive in the sense that it depicts the concern of the government and involves its action to a particular problem on which the policy is made. It has the sanction of law and authority behind it. Negatively, it involves a decision by the government officials regarding not taking any action on a particular issue. Next, coming to the relationship between policy and goals. To understand the meaning of policy in a better manner, it is very important to make a distinction between policy and goals. Goals are what policies aim at or hope to achieve. A goal is a desired state of affairs that a society or an organization attempts to realize. Goals can be understood in a variety of perspectives. These can be thought of as abstract values that a society would like to acquire. There are also goals that are specific and concrete. Removal of poverty is a goal that the government wants to pursue. Public policies are concerned with such specific goals. They are the instruments which lead to the achievement of these goals. Policy spells out the strategy of achieving a goal. Thus, policy is essentially an instrument to achieve a goal. Statement of a goal does not make it a policy. Next, coming to the relationship between policies and decisions, a distinction needs to be drawn between a policy and a decision also. Many a time the terms are used interchangeably, but that is not the correct usage. Individuals, organizations or government are constantly taking decisions, but all the decisions that are taken cannot be described as matters of policy. The essential core of decision making is to make a choice from the alternatives available in order to take an action. If there is only one course of action available, then there is nothing one can choose from and therefore no decision can be taken. A decision can be taken only when there is more than one alternative available. Thus, a decision is the act of making a choice. The entire science of decision making has been developed in order to analyze the conditions that can improve this activity and how a decision maker can improve his choice by expanding the number of alternatives available to him. There can be two types of decisions, programmed and non-programmed. Programmed decisions are repetitive and do not require a fresh consideration every time they are taken. These decisions are routine in nature and for these definite procedures can be worked out. Each decision need not be dealt with separately. In programmed decisions, habits, skills and knowledge about the problem are important. Non-programmed decisions are new and unstructured. No well laid out methods are available for such decisions. Each issue or question is to be dealt with separately. Such decisions are required in the situations of unprecedented nature. For example, breakdown of an epidemic, occurrence of earthquake, etc. Both the programmed and non-programmed decisions have to be taken in a broad framework or course of action. Public policy is the broad direction or perspective that the government lays down in order to take decisions. Each organization or the individual is enjoined to take a decision within a policy framework. Decision can be one-time action. Policy consists of several decisions that are taken to fulfill its aims. A policy consists of a series of decisions tied together into a coherent whole. There can be some similarity in the processes involved in decision making and policy making. Both are concerned with choice among alternatives, and for both, similar processes can be followed in generating alternatives. Next, coming to the characteristics of public policy making. The meaning and nature of public policy will become clearer by throwing light on different characteristics of public policy. Some of the major characteristics of public policy making are: first, public policy making is a very complex process. Policy making involves many components which are interconnected by communication and feedback loops and which interact in different ways. Some parts of the process are explicit and directly observable, but many others proceed through hidden channels that the officials themselves are often only partly aware of. These hidden procedures are very difficult and often impossible to observe. Thus, guidelines are often formed by a series of single decisions and result in a policy without any one of the decision makers being aware of that process. Second, policy making is a dynamic process. Policy making is a process that is a continuing activity taking place within a structure. For instance, it requires a continuing input of resources and motivation. If it is a dynamic process which changes with time, the sequences of its sub-processes and phases vary internally and with respect to each other. Third, policy making comprises various components. The complexity of public policy making, as we know, is an important characteristic of policy making. Public policy formulation often involves a great variety of substructures. The identity of these substructures and the degree of their involvement in policy making vary because of different issues, circumstances, and societal values. Fourth, policy structure makes different contributions. This characteristic suggests that every substructure makes a different and sometimes unique contribution to public policy. What sort of contributions substructures make depends in part on their formal and informal characteristics, which vary from society to society. Next feature is decision making. Policy making is a species of decision making because it lets us use decision making models for dealing with policy making. Next, it lays down major guidelines. Public policy in most cases lays down general directives rather than detailed instructions on the main lines of actions to be followed. After main lines of action have been decided on, detailed sub-policies that translate the general theory into more concrete terms are usually needed to execute it. Next feature, it results in action. Decision making can result in action in changes in the decision making itself or both or neither. The policies of most socially significant decision making, such as most public policy making, are intended to result in action. Also, policies directed at the policy making apparatus itself, such as efficiency drives in government, are action oriented. Next feature, Policy making is directed at the future. Policy making is directed at the future. This is one of its most important characteristics since it introduces the ever-present elements of uncertainty and doubtful prediction that establish the basic tone of nearly all policy making. Actual policy making tends to formulate policies in vague and elastic terms. Because the future is so uncertain, if it permits policy makers to adjust their policy according to emerging facts and enables them to guard against unforeseen circumstances, public policies are mainly formulated by governmental organs. Public policy is also directed in part at private persons and non-governmental structures, as when it calls for a law prohibiting a certain type of behavior or appeals to citizens to engage in private saving. Next, public policies aim at achieving what is in the public interest. However difficult it might be to find out what the public interest may concretely refer to, the term nevertheless conveys the idea of a general orientation and seems therefore to be important and significant. Furthermore, there is good evidence that the image of public interest influences the public policy making process and is therefore, at least as conceived by the various public policy making units, a real phenomenon and an important operational tool for the study of policy making. Next, policy making involves use of best possible means. In abstract terminology, public policy making aims at achieving the maximum net benefit. Benefits and costs take in part the form of realized values and impaired values respectively and cannot be in most cases. Next, coming to the growing importance of public policy. Actually, the scope of public policy is determined by the kind of role that the state adopts for itself in our society. In the classical capitalist society, state was assigned a limited role and it was expected that the state would merely act as a regulator of social and economic activity and not its promoter. With the advent of planned view of development, state began to be perceived as an active agent in promoting and shaping societies in its various activities. This was considered as a great change in the role of a state. Public policies expanded their scope from merely one of regulation to that of development. In India, the Planning Commission and its attendant agencies came into being in order to formulate policies and develop perspectives that could define the direction which the country would follow. So, the first major goal of public policies in our country has been in the area of socio-economic development. Wide-ranging policies were formulated in the area of industrial and agricultural development. Many policies were converted into statutes like Industrial Development and Regulating Act or Land Tenancy Act. Others were kept as directives in the various plan documents. For example, policy directions, the 5-year plans became the major source. These policies were of two types, one of regulation and the other of promotion. Laws laid down what could be done or not done by the entrepreneurs. This could be in the larger area like what goods can be produced by the public or whether certain goods can be traded only by government agencies. Laws also specified how state agencies themselves were to provide goods and services like electricity, transport, etc. The state undertook similar responsibility in the social sphere. Dowry Act, Divorce Act, etc. are examples of this. But socio-economic transformation was not the only problem when India became independent. There were also problems of national integrity. The external environment was a source of threat and the country had to develop suitable policies to defend itself. Apart from this, there have been internal challenges. Regionalism has given rise to fissiparous tendencies that have to be countered in the long-term perspective. These would include not only defense policies but also similar efforts at decentralization that create greater national cohesiveness. Thus, since independence, public policies in India have been formulated with a view to achieve socio-economic development and maintain national integrity. These goals have been complex, demanding coherent policies. This has been a difficult task because goals have had to be divided into sectors and many subsectors. Many a time, by its very nature, policies have been contradictory. What may be rational for economic development may not be so for national integration. Thus, the need of a strong center to cope with external threats, etc., is important, but it may go against the principle of decentralization, which provides for greater national cohesion of a heterogeneous society. These days, policy analysis is acquiring a lot of importance in the realm of the study of public administration. The success of policy formulation, execution and monitoring ultimately depends on the success of policy analysis. In India, this trend emerged with the launching of our 5-year plans. As the years passed by, one 5-year plan was followed by another and disillusionment started setting in. Goals of socio-economic development could not be achieved. Those who were supposed to benefit from the development effort began to lose. Attention shifted to the management and administration in order to find out why the policies were failing to achieve their objectives. This investigation did not include the questions of policies being right or wrong. It took the crisis of the 1960s to raise the issue of correctness of policy. Disenchantment with the development processes followed the two wars in 1962 and 1965. The International Monetary Fund enforced a devaluation of the rupee in 1966 and a terrible drought ravaged the land during 1966 to 68. It became evident that the development policies were in trouble. In the early 1970s, another war, drought, and the oil crisis gave a jolt to the plan that had been followed until then. The culmination was the imposition of national emergency in 1975 to cope with the rising dissatisfaction. It was the emergence of the turbulent period that led to the questioning of the policies that had been followed. It was no more a question of implementation alone. The argument that began to gain the popular view was that policy itself was faulty and all the blame could not be put on administration. The first to pick up this line of reasoning was the discipline of economics. The economic failures dominated the scene and therefore it was natural that economists were first ones to raise questions about the appropriateness of policy. Students of public administration began to emphasize that implementation failures could also emanate from inadequacy of public policy and therefore public policy analysis should also be included in the area of study of public administration. This argument got support from certain developments in the discipline of public administration. In view of the everyday experience, it was becoming difficult to sustain the classical concept of separation of politics and administration. This distinction categorized policy formulation and implementation as two distinct activities. Policy formulation was regarded as a political activity and policy implementation an administrative one. But this distinction got increasingly blurred and it was not an easy task to determine where policy formulation ended and where policy implementation began. It came to be accepted that both were interactive processes and had to be seen in an integrated way. With this change in view, students of public administration began to devote greater attention to the problems of policy formulation and influence of policy design on implementation. It is clear that public policies are the activities that the government undertakes in order to pursue certain established goals and objectives. In this unit, we discussed the meaning and importance of public policy and the difference between a public policy, a goal, and a decision. An attempt was also made to explain the relationship between public policy and politics. First, discuss the meaning and nature of public policies in detail. Second, explain the relationship between politics and public policy. Third, explain the distinctive features of public policy making.